Easy now. I'm not your enemy. You challenge me? No, we must cooperate. Let's submit. Not today! You won't win!
Look, at the Interplanetary Military Academy, we do not call them fights. We call them corrections. Species that clawed their way to the stars through pack hierarchy believe conflict is simply instruction made physical. If a cadet fails to read the social order, another will teach them. Pain is considered a universal language. You bare your fangs. You flare your bioluminescence. You expand your chest to cast a larger shadow. One party submits, the lesson is complete, and no one truly gets hurt. It is a dance as old as the galaxy. I am Instructor Valen Tor. I have overseen these corrections on the training floor for 12 cycles. I know the rhythm of violence. I know exactly when to watch and exactly when to step in, or at least I thought I did, until I met a 31-year-old furless biped from a Class 7 death world. His name was Cormac Vane, species human. By the Academy's physical standards, his build was entirely unremarkable. Medium height, lean frame, no dermal plating, no venom sacs, no secondary respiratory system, just soft, pale skin and a quiet demeanor. When I first reviewed his intake file, his endurance rated moderate. His strength fell far below several dozen predator species in his cohort. There was absolutely nothing in his biological profile that suggested trouble, but a Class 7 death world produces survivors, not victims. I just did not understand the difference yet. It happened during the afternoon rotation. The gravity plating hummed beneath our boots. The air smelled of sweat and ozone. Across the training floor, a cadet named Kralok noticed the human. Kralok was an apex predator from a world of perpetual twilight. He was a walking mountain of dense muscle and dark, jagged chitin. He stood 3 heads taller than Cormac. His species respected strength shown openly, and they deeply despised restraint. To a predator mind, stillness is prey behavior. Stillness is fear. Kralok watched Cormac move through a set of warm-up drills. The human did not look at him. He did not puff out his chest. In Kralok's eyes, that was the first mistake. The massive alien stepped closer. He let his immense shadow cut directly across the human's stance. He loomed. He let his sheer bulk speak for him. Cormac finished his drill. He straightened his posture. He looked up at Kralok. His face showed no challenge. It showed no submission. It showed absolutely nothing but mild attention. From the edge of the floor, I noted the interaction. I crossed my arms. I did not intervene. This was normal. This was the opening move of a standard dominance display. Kralok leaned forward, his mandibles clicking aggressively. He spoke in the common tongue, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake. You stand in my space. Cormac glanced down at the floor markings. He stepped half a pace to the side. He did not step backward. He just cleared the line. I did not mean to. That should have ended it. The human had yielded the territory. But Kralok snarled softly. The human's voice had not carried the tremor of fear he expected. There was no scent of adrenaline. Kralok felt insulted. You move when I tell you to move, Kralok replied, stepping into the human space again. Cormac looked at him. His breathing remained perfectly steady. I already did. I shifted my weight on the observation deck. The exchange had crossed from simple posturing into fixation. I calculated the distance. I prepared to step in. Kralok circled. He deliberately brushed Cormac's shoulder with his heavily armored forearm. It was not a strike. It was a physical reminder of mass. The entire training hall went quiet. Dozens of cadets slowed their drills to watch. Dominance disputes drew attention. Cormac did not turn. He did not square his shoulders to face the threat. He kept his posture entirely neutral and simply continued walking toward the next exercise station. Kralok let out a sharp barking laugh. He followed. He reached out and shoved Cormac hard from behind. The human stumbled one step forward. He caught his balance. He did not fall. I raised my hands, signaling the medical droids to stand by. This was the threshold. This was where the instructor steps in. I took a breath to call out the end of the correction. I was too slow. Cormac turned, his breathing had changed. It was not faster, it was deeper, slower. Do not do that again. His voice was unnervingly low. It was not a shout. It was not a roar meant to draw attention. It was a statement of absolute mechanical fact. Kralak saw something in the human's eyes that he could not process. There was no threat display, no raised fists, no crouch. The human just stood perfectly still. To a predator that reads tension to predict a strike, this was impossible. Cormac gave zero kinetic warnings. Kralak struck. It was a heavy sweeping blow aimed directly at the side of the human's head. It carried enough kinetic force to shatter concrete. It was meant to dominate. Cormac did not dodge backward. He stepped inside the arc of the massive arm. His forearm snapped up. Bone met chitin with a sickening sharp crack. Kralak hissed in sudden shock. Before the sound could leave the alien's throat, Cormac grabbed the predator's wrist. He pivoted on his heel. He used Kralak's own forward momentum against him, pulling the giant off balance. Cormac stepped closer, so close that Kralak's fangs and claws were completely useless. The human's free hand struck. It was a short, incredibly controlled burst of kinetic energy. Two fingers buried themselves deep into the cluster of nerve ganglia beneath Kralak's primary pectoral plate. Kralak gasped. The sound was hollow, stripped of all oxygen. Cormac immediately released the wrist and took one single step back. The apex predator staggered. His massive legs simply stopped receiving signals from his brain. He dropped to one knee, then the other. His heavy head hit the floor plating. His breathing became a ragged, erratic wheeze. His skin began to flush a deep, bruised purple. Complete physiological shock. The entire exchange took exactly 3 seconds. I was already sprinting across the floor. I arrived to find Cormac Vane standing perfectly still. His arms rested casually at his sides. His chest rose and fell in a steady, relaxed rhythm. He was looking down at the paralyzed giant. The training hall was paralyzed too. Complete, suffocating silence. I scanned Kralak quickly. Alive. Conscious. Entirely incapable of moving. I looked up at the human, my mandibles flaring in authority. What happened here, Cormac did not look away from the fallen cadet. He told me to move. I did. He did not stop. I felt a sudden icy chill crawl up my spine. I looked into the human's eyes. There was no rage, there was no panic. There was no pride. There was only a conclusion. The medical staff rushed in. They hoisted the massive alien onto a grav stretcher and carried him away. I dismissed the floor. The cadets practically fled, throwing terrified glances over their shoulders at the unremarkable biped who had just dismantled their hierarchy in 3 seconds. Cormac remained exactly where he was until I explicitly told him to leave. He did not argue. He did not celebrate. He just picked up his towel and walked out. I stood alone in the empty hall. I replayed the moment in my mind. I had seen thousands of fights, brutal ones, bloody ones, displays meant to send messages across generations. This had been none of that. The human had not escalated. He had not warned. He had simply ended it. And I realized with a growing sense of dread that I had not stepped in too late because I was slow. I had stepped in too late because the human had finished the fight before the Academy's rules could even catch up. By the next morning, the Academy was a powder keg. Rumors spread like a plasma fire. The predator species were secretly replaying the security footage frame by frame. They were desperately searching for a trick, a hidden weapon. A moment of sheer luck, they found nothing. They only found a paralyzing proximity. The human had closed the distance where natural weapons failed. To the alien mind, it was an aberration. I filed the incident as a concluded dominance dispute. I worded it carefully to avoid disciplinary action. But the footage triggered an automatic high-level review. Cormac stood inside an evaluation chamber. The walls were stark white, no restraints. Behind the mirrored glass, I stood in the dark with Dr. Silas Moore. She was the Academy's lead behavioral specialist. Dr. Moore stared at the holographic overlays hovering above her datapad. Her 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. She kept rerunning the 3-second time frame of the physical contact. "This data must be corrupted," she whispered, her voice tight. I leaned closer to the glass. "What is it?" She highlighted a violently fluctuating red line on the graph. When Kralok initiates the shove, the human's heart rate is resting at 60 beats per minute, standard for their species. When Kralok throws the lethal strike, adrenaline should flood the subject's system. Heart rate should spike, muscle tension should peak. The fight or flight response is universal across all known carbon-based life forms. She turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. Instructor Tor. In the exact millisecond the human fractured Kralok's nerve cluster, his heart rate dropped to 48. I stared at the numbers. My blood ran cold. He calmed down. He did not view it as a fight, Dr. Moore said quietly. A fight implies a struggle. A fight implies doubt. His physiology registered the event the same way one might register swatting an insect. It was not combat, it was maintenance. We entered the chamber. Cormac sat in a metal chair looking at his hands. He did not seem bothered by the sterile environment. Kralok outweighs you by 400 pounds. I started keeping my tone measured. His species possesses natural armor and lethal appendages. Why did you not disengage when he first approached you? Cormac looked up. Because he was not dangerous yet. Dr. Moore tilted her head. Define dangerous, cadet. When he started touching me, Cormac replied smoothly. After I explicitly told him to stop, I paced the length of the table. Predator species escalate through ritual contact. They bump shoulders. They bare teeth. They give you time to submit. You understand that these dominance disputes are tolerated here. You could have backed down. You could have surrendered the social standing. Cormac nodded. I did. I moved out of his way. That was the first thing I did. You did not show fear. Dr. Moore countered. You did not submit. I am not a part of his hierarchy. The words were spoken so plainly they echoed in the small room. There was no arrogance in them, just an absolute, unshakable fact. Then why end it so violently, I demanded, leaning over the table. Why strike the nerve cluster? You could have killed him. Cormac met my gaze. His eyes were dark, fathomless pools. If I let him continue posturing, someone gets hurt worse. Either him or me or a guard who tries to step in. He refused to respect the space. I closed the space. You calculated all of that in a fraction of a second, Dr. Moore stated. It was not a question. Yes. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. The lack of emotion was what truly unsettled me. When did you decide the outcome of the interaction? When he shoved me from behind. Why didn't you posture, Dr. Moore? Asked, her voice laced with genuine alien confusion. Why not yell? Why not show him your capability so he might back away? Cormac sighed, a soft sound of human weariness. Posturing gave his people time to decide the wrong things. We dismissed him. As the heavy blast doors sealed shut behind the human, Dr. Moore immediately accessed the terminal. She bypassed standard security and stamped a bright red digital seal on Cormac Vane's personnel file. Hazard classification level 9. I grabbed her wrist. You cannot be serious. Level 9 is reserved for feral bioweapons. He is a cadet. He is a sociopath. She shot back, her multiple eyes wide with genuine alarm. Instructor, did you not hear him? He possesses no ritual escalation. He bypasses all known social safeguards of conflict. If you trigger him, he simply terminates the threat. Without warning, without anger, without remorse. I watched the empty chair where the human had been sitting. I was not entirely sure she was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the academy mutated. I was officially assigned to Shadow Cadet Vane. I observed him in the mess halls, the engineering bays, the atmospheric simulation decks. The alien cadets treated him like an unexploded bomb. They gave him a wide berth. If he walked down a corridor, entire squads of heavily armed, biologically superior warriors pressed their backs against the bulkheads to let the soft, furless biped pass. But Cormac did not act like a conqueror. He did not demand better food. He did not take the best seats in the lecture halls. In fact, if someone accidentally bumped into him, Cormac would apologize. He would step aside. He yielded space continuously. I watched him one evening in the heavy machinery bay. The bay was deserted. Cormac was standing under the massive chassis of a suborbital dropship. He was wearing stained coveralls, holding a thermal wrench, and drinking a dark steaming fluid the humans called coffee. The ship's primary suspension relay was failing. A heavy-duty maintenance drone was scheduled to fix it the next cycle. The relay required exactly 490 newtons of torque to secure, a force that would snap the bones of most standard gravity species. I watched from the catwalk, cloaked in the shadows. Cormac finished his coffee. He set the cup on a crate. He reached up with his bare hands. He gripped the heavy steel locking collar of the relay. He planted his boots on the deck, his muscles visibly coiled beneath his thin shirt. With a single sharp exhale, he twisted his torso. The metal shrieked. The collar locked into place with a heavy concussive thud. 490 newtons of force, applied by a creature with no kinetic enhancements. Cormac wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, picked up his coffee, and walked away. I stood frozen on the catwalk. The revelation hit me with the force of a kinetic strike. The Academy had fundamentally misunderstood humanity. We had mistaken their softness for weakness. We had mistaken their silence for submission. Alien species evolved to use violence as a ladder. You fight to climb. You posture to show where you stand on that ladder. Humans did not use violence to climb. They possessed unimaginable latent physical power born from a planet that tried to crush them every second of their existence, but they actively suppressed it. They built rules to contain it. They did not use violence to establish dominance. They used violence to enforce boundaries. As long as you stayed outside the boundary, the human was your best friend. He would yield his seat. He would apologize if you bumped into him. He would smile. But the second you confidently stepped across that line, you were no longer a rival climbing a social ladder. You were a structural integrity failure, and humans fix structural failures with terrifying, emotionless efficiency. I rushed back to my quarters. I needed to file an immediate addendum to the Academy's behavioral doctrine. I needed to warn the administration. We were teaching alien predators to test boundaries. We were practically begging them to push the human. I drafted the warning. I hit send. The console beeped. Access denied. Protocol override. I frowned. I tapped the screen. A new set of orders flashed across my display, stamped with the digital signatures of 3 apex predator elite families. Cadet Cormac Vane and Cadet Kralak had just been reassigned. Tomorrow morning. Sector 4, Zero Gravity Survival Simulation. Live fire authorized. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The predator families had felt the sting of humiliation. They did not understand the boundary. They thought Cormac had simply gotten lucky. They had bribed the administration. They were going to lock a Class 7 Death Worlder Balware in a sealed room with 4 heavily armed, humiliated apex predators. They thought they were setting a trap to punish an arrogant herbivore. They didn't realize they were locking themselves in a cage with a monster. I tried to stop it. I tried to pull the authorization protocols and shut down the entire training block, but pride and wealth move faster than safety regulations at the Academy. The elite families of the Predator caste had spoken in the shadows. A human, a soft-skinned creature from a supposedly inferior lineage, had embarrassed their bloodline on the open floor. To their culture, blood demanded a physical toll. They did not care about my behavioral reports. They did not care about the hazard level 9 classification. They simply thought I was protecting a weakling. They bribed the administration. They altered the roster. The next morning, the schedule flashed across my terminal. Sector 4, Deep Space Hull Breach Simulation, Zero Gravity Environment, Live Fire Authorizations active. The roster listed 5 names. 4 were the most lethal Apex Predator cadets in the Academy, including Kralak. The 5th name was Cormac Vane. I sprinted from my quarters, my boots slamming against the metallic grating of the quarters. I reached the observation deck of Sector 4, just as the massive reinforced vault doors were sliding shut. Sector 4 was a colossal cylindrical chamber. It was designed to mimic the interior of a heavy cruiser. Steel bulkheads, exposed piping. A cold, unforgiving environment meant to test cadets under the sheer terror of an explosive decompression. I slammed my hands against the 5-inch thick, transparent aluminum window. I looked down into the chamber. There they were, Kralak and 3 others of his kind. They wore standard Class 4 void suits, their massive frames stretching the reinforced fabric. Their claws clicked against the steel grating, 2 tons of combined muscle predatory instinct and wounded pride. They were not looking at the simulation objectives. They were looking across the room. Standing by the primary airlock holding a heavy magnetic wrench was Cormac Vane, 31 years old, average height, no biological weapons. He wore his void suit loosely. He was running a diagnostic check on his wrist monitor. He looked entirely undisturbed. He did not look like a warrior walking into an execution arena. He looked like a bored technician walking into a messy room. I slammed my fist onto the emergency abort button on my console. Nothing happened. The system flashed a cold, indifferent red. Manual override engaged, communications severed, safety protocols offline. I was locked out. The aristocratic families had paid off the network engineers. The cameras were looping a false feed to the rest of the academy. No one was coming. I was trapped behind the glass, a ghost forced to watch a murder. Inside the chamber, the simulation initiated. The ambient white light snapped off instantly, plunging the massive room into darkness. A split second later, the harsh, strobing crimson of emergency flares activated. A low, bone-rattling siren began to wail. The environmental controls engaged, initiating a slow, deliberate atmospheric venting. The objective of the drill was simple: find the microfractures in the hull and patch them before the oxygen ran out. The four predators ignored the warning lights. They ignored the venting atmosphere. They spread out. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision, taking the four corners of the room. Pack hunting tactics. They were cutting off the humans' escape routes. Kralak stepped forward. He did not speak. He did not posture. He had learned his lesson from the training floor. There was no need for dominance displays when the prey was cornered. He bared his fangs in the strobing red light. Then the gravity plating deactivated. The transition to zero gravity is violently disorienting for any ground-dwelling species. The stomach floats, the inner ear panics, the brain screams that it is falling. The predators adapted instantly. They had trained for this. They used their massive muscular legs to launch themselves off the steel bulkheads. They turned into biological missiles hurtling through the floating debris of the room directly toward the human. They expected Cormac to flail. They expected him to panic in the weightless void. They expected an easy kill. Cormac did not panic. He did not try to fight them in the air. As his boots began to lift off the grating, he calmly tapped his heel against the deck. A sharp metallic click echoed through the chamber. The heavy magnetic soles of his boots engaged. He clamped to the floor, solid, rooted. As the first predator lunged through the air, claws extended to rip the human's void suit open, Cormac simply leaned backward. He did not block. He let the massive alien sail inches past his face. The predator crashed violently into the opposite wall, his momentum completely uncontrolled. The second and third predators struck from the flanks. Cormac pivoted on his magnetic anchors. He swung the heavy magnetic wrench in a tight, brutal arc. It caught the second predator across the helmet, cracking the visor and sending the beast spinning wildly out of control into the ceiling. But there were four of them, and they were fast. Kralak came from the blind spot. He did not aim for a lethal blow immediately. He aimed to cripple. His massive claw caught Cormac's shoulder. The reinforced fabric of the human's void suit tore. A visceral, sickening sound. Cormac grunted, his boots sliding back an inch against the magnetic lock. A blossom of bright red blood escaped his suit. It floated upward into the zero-gravity vacuum, breaking apart into dozens of perfect crimson spheres in the strobing light. It was the first time I had seen the human bleed. It was a stark reminder of his mortality. The predators smelled the copper in the thinning air. It galvanized them. The three recovered aliens latched onto the bulkheads. They pushed off again, circling back. Kralak anchored himself to a steel pillar above his eyes, locked on the floating droplets of human blood. They were not rushing now. They realized the human was anchored, but he was bleeding. He was trapped. They began to coordinate a four-point simultaneous strike. Behind the glass, my breathing grew shallow. Cormac could deflect one. He could maybe deflect two. But four apex predators launching themselves with the force of a kinetic railgun in a zero-gravity environment, it was a mathematical impossibility. He was going to die. Cormac looked at his torn shoulder. He watched his own blood floating away from him. He did not look afraid. He did not look panicked. He looked profoundly, dangerously annoyed. He reached up and pressed a patch over the tear in his suit, sealing it. Then he looked at the four massive aliens preparing to tear him apart. He looked at the vast, empty space of the chamber. He looked at the main oxygen feed pipe running along the eastern bulkhead. He reached down to his tool belt. He did not pull out a weapon. He tightened his grip on the heavy magnetic wrench. He disengaged his boots. He did not launch himself at the predators. He launched himself directly toward the eastern bulkhead. Kralak let out a sound of triumph. The prey was fleeing. The hunt was ending. The four predators kicked off the walls, converging on the human's trajectory. But Cormac was not trying to escape. He slammed feet first into the eastern bulkhead, his magnetic boots locking with a violent thud. He was now standing perpendicular to the predators hurtling toward him, and he was standing directly next to the primary oxygen pressure valve, the only thing keeping the room from becoming a total vacuum. He raised the wrench. I hit the glass with both fists. No, Kralak saw what the human was aiming at. The predator's eyes widened in sudden absolute terror. He tried to arrest his momentum. He tried to grab onto a floating crate. But in zero gravity, once you commit to a trajectory, you cannot stop. Cormac looked directly at Kralak. His face was a mask of cold mechanical calculation. He brought the heavy wrench down with devastating force. He did not strike flesh. He struck the primary atmospheric pressure valve, shattering the structural integrity of the room itself. The sound of shearing metal was deafening, a catastrophic shriek that tore through the chamber. Then the sound died entirely. In a vacuum, there is no noise. There is only the violent rushing vibration of the atmosphere being sucked into the endless void. The strobing crimson lights reflected off the sudden explosion of freezing condensation. The air in the room instantly turned into a thick, swirling blizzard of frost and escaping oxygen. Cormac's own blood, floating in the zero-gravity environment, flash froze into perfect, solid crimson pearls. The four apex predators hit the eastern bulkhead hard. They had launched themselves with lethal intent, expecting to tear the human apart. Instead, they crashed into a wall of solid ice and failing gravity. They bounced off the steel plating, their massive bodies spinning wildly out of control. They were the galaxy's most elite killers. They had claws that could shred armor. They had jaws that could crush titanium. But in the suffocating silence of a hard vacuum, muscle and teeth mean absolutely nothing. Panic took them. It was a primal, mindless terror. They thrashed in the zero-gravity void, their powerful limbs grasping at nothing but freezing vapor. Kralak's eyes rolled back in his helmet. His chest heaved violently, desperately trying to pull oxygen from a suit that was rapidly losing pressure. They were going to die. They knew it. I knew it. Behind the reinforced glass of the observation deck, I pressed my hands against the freezing pain, my breathing ragged. I was watching 5 cadets suffocate because the Academy's pride was too fragile to accept a boundary. I looked at Cormac Vane. He was still anchored to the bulkhead by his magnetic boots. He was not thrashing. He was not panicking. He checked the digital pressure gauge on his wrist. It was dropping into the lethal red zone. He had maybe 4 minutes before his own brains starved of oxygen. He had pushed them all over the cliff. Now they were in free fall. But humans do not push people off cliffs just to watch them hit the bottom. They do it to prove that the cliff exists. Cormac disengaged his boots. He kicked off the bulkhead with a precise, calculated burst of kinetic energy. He shot through the freezing fog like a torpedo. He did not aim for the emergency exit. He aimed directly for Kralak. The massive alien was flailing his claws, scraping uselessly against the air. Cormac slammed into his chest, grabbing the thick harness of Kralak's void suit. With a brutal jerk, Cormac slapped a heavy magnetic tether onto the predator's chest plate and slammed the other end into the steel floor. Kralak was suddenly anchored. The violent spinning stopped. The alien looked down at the human through his cracked visor. He expected a killing blow. He expected the human to leave him there to choke. Instead, Cormac reached into his tool belt. He pulled out a heavy plasma torch and a thick slab of industrial hull sealant. He slammed the tools directly into Kralak's massive, trembling hands. Cormac pointed at the ruptured pressure valve. Then he tapped the side of his own helmet, locking eyes with the terrifying predator. The message was clear. It transcended language. It transcended species. Fix it, or we all die. Kralak stared at the human for one fraction of a second. The predator hierarchy evaporated in the freezing void. There was no alpha. There was no dominance display. There was only a terrifying, undeniable will to survive. Kralak gripped the plasma torch. Cormac did not wait to watch him work. He kicked off the floor again. He moved through the zero-gravity chamber with the terrifying grace of a creature born to solve impossible problems. He caught the second predator, tethered him, handed him a wrench. He caught the third, tethered him, pointed to a secondary fracture in the piping. He turned four of the most lethal killers in the galaxy into an emergency repair crew. For 3 excruciating minutes, the chamber was a silent frenzy of blinding plasma light and flying sparks. They worked in the void. They worked as a pack. The human did not bark orders. He simply threw himself into the most dangerous gaps, holding superheated pipes together with his bare-suited hands, while the predators welded them shut. Behind the glass, my heart pounded against my ribs. I was witnessing a miracle forged in absolute terror. The digital countdown on the primary console flashed. 30 seconds of breathable air left. Kralok roared though no sound carried. He slammed the final sealant patch over the massive rupture of the primary valve. Cormac locked his boots next to the alien, grabbed the manual override wheel, and ripped it downward with every ounce of strength left in his bleeding shoulder. The valve sealed shut. A heavy mechanical thud resonated through the deck plates. The emergency life support systems recognized the seal. The massive overhead vents engaged. The hiss of compressed oxygen flooding back into the room was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A second later, the artificial gravity violently re-engaged. All 5 bodies slammed down onto the steel grating. They lay there in the swirling, dissipating frost, chests heaving, sucking in desperate, ragged breaths of recycled air. The strobing red lights faded back to the harsh, sterile white of the standard illumination. I hit the manual release on the vault doors. The heavy locks disengaged. Medical teams and armed security flooded past me into the chamber. But as the medics rushed forward, they stopped dead in their tracks. Cormac Vane pushed himself up from the floor. His void suit was scorched, torn, and heavily stained with his own frozen blood. He looked exhausted. He picked up his magnetic wrench, clipped it back onto his belt, and began to walk toward the exit. He did not look back. Behind him, Kralok and the 3 other apex predators slowly rose to their feet. They did not leap at the human's exposed back. They did not snarl. They lowered their heads and they followed him. They trailed exactly 2 paces behind Cormac, their massive shoulders slumped, their predatory eyes fixed firmly on the deck plates. It was not the posture of defeated combatants. It was the posture of absolute, unquestioning reverence. They had looked into the abyss, and the soft-skinned human had ordered them to build a bridge across it. The fallout was immediate, and it was devastating. 3 hours later, I stood in the center of the High Council chamber. The room was a massive amphitheater of polished black stone designed to intimidate. The highest-ranking military officers and aristocratic politicians of the allied predator castes sat in the elevated tiers glaring down at us. Cormac Vane stood beside me. A medical droid had sealed his shoulder wound, but he still wore his stained, burned coveralls. He looked bored. The chief magistrate, a towering reptilian warlord, slammed his ceremonial staff against the dais. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This is an outrage," the magistrate hissed, his voice amplified across the chamber. "Cadet Vane, you are charged with the malicious destruction of Academy property. You triggered a catastrophic system failure. You deliberately endangered the lives of 4 high-caste cadets. You are a chaotic element, a level 9 hazard. We demand your immediate expulsion and extradition to a penal colony." I stepped forward, my mandibles flaring in defiance. "Magistrate, the simulation was rigged. The safety protocols were illegally overridden. Cadet Vane was subjected to a coordinated assassination attempt." "Silence, Instructor," the magistrate roared. "Your bias toward this primitive species is documented. The human deliberately destroyed the oxygen valve. We have the telemetry. He weaponized the environment. He did what was necessary to survive," I countered, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "He is a feral beast," another council member shouted from the upper tiers. "He cannot control his violent impulses. He has no place among civilized warriors." Before I could speak again, the heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber swung open. The entire council fell silent. Kralok walked down the center aisle. He was still wearing the scorched bottom half of his void suit. His torso was wrapped in thick white medical bandages. He moved slowly, painfully, but his head was held high. His dark, forward-set eyes locked onto the chief magistrate. He stopped directly behind Cormac. The human did not turn around. He did not flinch. Kralak looked up at the High Council. His voice, a deep, rumbling, tectonic shift filled the room. He did not endanger us. The magistrate narrowed his eyes. Cadet Kralak, you are recovering from trauma. You do not need to testify. We are removing the threat. You are removing nothing, Kralak snarled. The sound was so filled with raw, predatory menace that several council members visibly shrank back into their seats. Kralak stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the human. We hunted him. We locked him in a cage, stripped him of gravity, and tried to take his life. He could have fought us. He could have broken my bones again. He could have let the vacuum take us. The massive alien paused, his breathing heavy. Instead, he shattered the room to show us how small we were. He took our lives, held them in his bare hands, and then he gave them back to us. He did not conquer us. He saved us. He taught us the boundary between pride and death. Kralak turned his massive head, sweeping his gaze across the aristocratic politicians. If this academy expels him, Kralak said slowly, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. If any of you attempt to lay a hand on Cormac Vane, my family's fleet will blockade this sector. We will burn this academy to ash. You will not touch him. He belongs to our pack now. Complete absolute silence draped over the council chamber. A predator-cast air had just threatened interplanetary war to protect a human. The political ramifications were catastrophic. The magistrate's face paled. He looked down at his datapad, his hands trembling slightly. This is highly irregular, the magistrate stammered. He looked down at Cormac. The human was just staring at a smudge on his boot. The magistrate swallowed hard. Clearly, Earth has sent us one of their most elite operatives, a black ops specialist, a psychological warfare expert. Instructor Tor unsealed the human's classified military dossier. The Council demands to know the exact nature of the weapon Earth has deployed into our ranks. I nodded. I accessed the secure terminal on the podium. I had requested the unredacted files from the Terran Command 3 hours ago. The decryption sequence finished. The file opened. I scanned the document. My eyes locked onto the primary occupation field. I stopped breathing. My 4 hearts stuttered in my chest. I read the line again. I read it a third time, certain the translation matrix had failed. Instructor Tor the magistrate prompted impatiently. What is his military designation? What class of assassin is this man? I looked up from the screen. I looked at the Council of Warlords. I looked at Kralak, the apex predator, standing as a bodyguard. I looked at Cormac Vane, the man who had brought the entire interplanetary academy to its knees in under an hour. He is not a soldier, I whispered. My voice cracked. The microphone amplified the tremor in my throat. The chamber murmured in confusion. What do you mean he is not a soldier? The magistrate demanded. Read his official Terran occupation, Instructor. I looked back down at the screen. His name is Cormac Vane, I said, my voice barely audible above the hum of the ventilation. Age 31. No prior military service. No combat commendations. No tactical training. I looked up, meeting the magistrate's terrified eyes. Before being drafted into the Academy Exchange Program, his civilian occupation was a mining safety engineer. The words hung in the air. They did not simply echo, they detonated. A safety engineer. A civilian whose entire job was to inspect pipes, check pressure valves, and ensure standard operational compliance in underground tunnels. A man who fixed things for a living. The High Council stared at Cormac in abject paralytic horror. They had sent their greatest warriors. They had sent the heirs to empires forged in blood and conquest. And a human tradesman had dismantled their entire philosophy of war before his lunch break. If this was the baseline, if this was merely an average peaceful civilian of the Terran systems, what in the name of the cosmic void did their actual military look like? The Academy changed that day. There was no grand announcement. There were no parades. The Council quietly dismissed the charges. The Predator families withdrew their complaints. The curriculum was quietly rewritten in the middle of the night. The concept of dominance disputes was entirely erased from the Academy guidelines. It was replaced by a single heavily emphasized chapter on boundary recognition and de-escalation. I walk the training floors now, and the atmosphere is different. It is quieter. It is more respectful. When cadets cross paths, they do not bump shoulders. They do not bare their teeth. They step aside. They look at the humans in our ranks with a new profound understanding. The galaxy used to believe that roaring was the ultimate display of strength. We thought that showing our teeth, puffing our chests, and casting long shadows was the peak of biological evolution. We thought the humans were weak because they were quiet. We were fools. Humans are not quiet because they are prey. Humans are quiet because they evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They know exactly how fragile life is. They know exactly how thin the glass is between breathing and suffocating. They don't posture. They don't threaten. They don't draw out a conflict to stroke their own egos. If you leave them alone, they will build you ships. They will fix your pipes. They will drink their bitter, boiling liquids and smile at you in the hallways. But if you push them, if you confidently step across the invisible line they have drawn in the sand, if you force them to conclude that you are no longer a person but a structural hazard, they will not roar. They will just break the universe in half, stare you dead in the eye, and ask you to fix it.